Today, then, we're going to go forward with some readings here. Today, we're looking at the book Ancient Mirrors of Womanhood by Merlin Stone, who is the author of When God Was a Woman. Novel idea, isn't it? She's an amazing woman here, and she's researched a lot of the Sumerian texts and many other things. We're going to start here in Sumer. This is volume 2 we're looking at, and I'm just going to read some of this stuff because I think it has some very interesting points. Of sea and star and serpent. Sumer, the most ancient literate civilization on record, left a legacy of goddess imagery and reverence that gleams with the rich pantheon of 5,000 years. A creator of heaven and earth as giver of the laws of life, the concept of writing, methods of agriculture, and much more, images of goddess reverence in Sumer allows us to glimpse into the dawn of civilization. After several millennia of goddess-worshipping Neolithic cultures in the Near East, such as those of Jericho, Catalhuyuk, Hasalar, and Hassana, and Halaf periods, a culture began to develop along the southern banks of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. This culture, known as Sumerian, appears to have been first in the world to have developed a system of writing. The Sumerian culture is associated with a slightly earlier culture known as Ubadian. I think it's close to Akkadian there. Formed by peoples who had entered Mesopotamia shortly before the Sumerian period. Some of the people of the Ubadian culture are known to have settled at the site of Eridu, close to the Persian Gulf. Although Ubadians are most often credited with initiating Sumerian development, lesser cultures known in the Eridu area probably played a part in the initialization of this ancient civilization. None of the evidence has so far provided scholars with knowledge of the racial or linguistic identity of the ancient Sumerians. The Sumerian culture confuses the identification of the Sumerian peoples even further, in that their language was neither Semitic nor Indo-European. The two major language groups of the area, one of the foremost scholars of Sumerian culture, Professor S. Kramer, describes the Sumerian language as reminiscent to some extent of the Altic languages. Not familiar with that term. These languages are best known among groups of northern Siberia and among the Finns. The Turks and other Asian groups. One must be careful not to draw conclusions from such a statement, but consideration of this possible link certainly suggests the need for further research. Thus, the racial identity of the Sumerians is still quite open to question, but there is no question about that from about 3500 BC onwards, Sumer was well into an astonishing cultural flowering. The development of the culture reached a high point at the Jemet Nasir period, about 3200 BC, with the invention of writing. From 3200 BC until shortly before 2000 BC, writing appears to have been used primarily for keeping temple records of land assignments and the gathering and distribution of crops and livestock. One early law code, Urukaghinga, is dated about 2300 BC. But except for a few fragments in temple records, most of the epic poetry, law codes, hymns, and ritual texts of Sumer are from slightly before 2000 BC and afterwards. The Sumerian symbol of writing, wedge-shaped marks, cuneiform, pressed into clay tablets while they were still damp, evolved from the initial use of pictorial symbols to those of an increasingly abstract nature. This major contribution to history was then adopted by the Semitic Akkadians, and through the Phoenicians of Canaan was eventually passed on to the Greeks, and alphabet symbols undergoing considerable changes and development throughout many centuries in which this occurred. It is vital to realize that our current knowledge of the Sumerians is based on the chance fortune of what has been so far been discovered and the condition in which it's been found. The artifacts that provide us with information about Sumerian life and religious beliefs are those that were in use about 3200 to 1700 BC. Evacuations are continually adding to our body of knowledge about the Sumerian people, and this occurs over many decades. Information is often found that confirms or contradicts scholarly theories based upon earlier evidence. It is for this reason that I have chosen to present information that is known from specific tablets and artifacts, pointing out hopefully interesting connections, but avoiding overly generally analysis about what we simply do not know yet. It is important, however, to realize that what is known today about a particular goddess image is not necessarily or even likely the totality of that image as it was known in the past. It is information that we know with some certainty today. The evidence of Mesopotamia reveals that there was a close relationship between the Sumerians and the Semites, who were settled slightly further to the north. This was attested by 2400 BC, but may have existed long before that time. Many rulers of Sumer and Semite names at that several sites. Evidence of Sumerian and early Semitic culture has been found side by side. One scholar even went so far as to suggest that the entire Sumerian culture was composed of Semitic peoples, and that the Sumerian language was used only for purposes of writing. But the evidence seemed to refute this hypothesis at almost every point. It is true that the Sumerian goddess Inanna is closely associated with the Semitic goddess Ishtar. Ishtar eventually replacing the name of Inanna at the great temple of Erech. But there are many differences in the imagery and symbolism of the goddess as she appears under each of these names. Even within the Sumerian culture itself, many differences are to be noted between goddess imagery and ritual as known in separate locations in various periods. One location that invites further investigation is that of the city of Nippur, an extremely sacred center of the Sumerians, and specifically connected to the bestowal of divine right to rulership. The name most often mentioned by scholars as the chief deity of Nippur is Enlil, although it was his wife, Ninil, who actually bestowed the divine right. Careful examination of the Sumerian account of Enlil's rape of Ninil before their marriage, the name of Nanshabargunu, given as the mother of Ninil and as the mother of Nippur, another stating that the goddess Nidaba, goddess of writing, was the mother of Ninil, and the importance of the laws of Nidaba in Lagash, where the goddess was most often named as Nanshi, all exist as clues for a more careful exploration of the special sanctity of Nippur. Though Enlil's name was certainly important during the historical periods, the powers of the goddess may have preceded the importance of Ninil in Nippur. Interesting point. We might also want to be more carefully examine the legend of the attack upon the goddess Ereshkigal by the war god Nergal, an account that deals with the way in which Ereshkigal lost the sole sovereignty of the land of Erkala, which is the underworld. This exploration should certainly include a careful consideration of the role of the male deity Enki, or Ea, in his assistance to Nergal, as well as a study of the transformations and the continually increasing importance and power of Enki as he appears in the legends of Ninba, Ninhursag, and Inanna. While reading and rereading the translations of Sumerian epic poetry, it is difficult not to take notice of and to respond to the poetic use of metaphor and simile, as well as to the style of phrasing in which an idea is presented and then expanded upon. In the prayer En Heduana, about 2300 BC, this ancient poet, priestess, describes her sad plight at being driven from the temple of Ningal in the city of Ur as that of being forced to flee the coat like a swallow. The hymn, actually to Inanna, the daughter of Ningal, describes the wrath of Inanna as an attacking storm, and Inanna's voice as blowing louder than a howling storm, moaning louder than evil winds. Another text, describing the destruction of the temple at Ur about 400 years later, is a lament for the goddess Ningal. Here we can see the expansion of the message conveyed as each new fact confirms and further explains the lines preceding it in this poem. Your city has been made into ruins. You are no longer its mistress. Your righteous house has been taken over to the pickaxe. You no longer inhabit it. Your people have been led to the slaughter. You are no longer their queen. O queen, your city weeps before you as its mother. We'll go on in the next image.